Senior High School On-Air Academy. Unstoppable! Delivering you quality education amidst pandemic.
To defend school opening to October 5.
Unstoppable!
Giving you accessible learning platform anytime, anywhere.
Ang klase, whatever form it is.
Comprehensible!
Buckle up and get yourself ready.
I will repeat, then you will do it later on.
Accurate!
Skill that includes all living things.
Today, we will be talking about rational functions.
Simplify.
This is Jaw speaking. How may I help you?
This is Untitled School Radio's Senior High School On-Air Academy. And now, here's your USO for
Biology Foundations.
Your guide in the subject, General Biology 1.
Biology Foundations.
Biology Foundations.
Good day, my dear grade 11 students. This is Sir Alexander Espicio, your radio teacher. I'm back for another interesting and fascinating episode. Have you eaten your most important meal of the day? What food did you eat? Does it taste good? Do you know whether your meal has protein, carbohydrates, and fats? That's great. Eating the right food is very important because it gives us the necessary nutrients to live and carry out different activities. Most importantly, is studying at home. Our topic for today is very much related to food. You heard it right, but we will not be talking about the recipes on how to make these dishes. Rather, we'll talk about how the food you eat is broken down into simpler forms to be used by the 37 trillion cells in our body. How? Through the process known as respiration. Although the processes are interconnected, this is not the same with respiration that talks about breathing in or inhalation and breathing out or exhalation. Rather, we will talk about respiration in the level of the cells, the cellular respiration. You will learn how different living organisms like bacteria, fungi, and animals execute this process. Hence, by the end of this broadcast, you should be able to differentiate aerobic from anaerobic respiration and explain the major features and sequence the chemical events of cellular respiration. Before we start our discussion on the new topic, let's review the important concepts that we have discussed on the previous episode of this subject. Last time, we talked about patterns of electron flow through light-dependent reaction and the significant events of Calvin cycle. In our discussion, you learned that plants have the ability to make their own food in the process known as, you're right, photosynthesis. This process is divided into two unique stages. What are these stages again? Correct, the light-dependent reaction and the light-independent reaction. I'll repeat. The light-dependent reaction and the light-independent reaction. The light reaction takes place in thylakoid membrane of the chloroplast grana, wherein special pigments like chlorophyll absorb light energy to create an excited high-energy electron. The summary of the process in light reaction are the following. First, light is absorbed by chlorophyll. Second, energy from the light splits water. Third, hydrogen from water reduced NADP plus to NADPH. Finally, photophosphorylation makes ATP from ADP. Always remember that products of the light reaction stage is oxygen, ATP, and NADPH. Meanwhile, the light-independent reaction, which is also known as dark reaction or Calvin cycle, takes place in the stroma of the chloroplast. One requirement for this process to happen is the presence of carbon dioxide gas. Light energy is not a direct requirement for this process to take place. Rather, this process requires the products that was made in the light reaction like ATP and NADPH to create sugar molecules. There are 3 basic stages in Calvin cycle. What are these again? That is right. These are fixation, reduction, and regeneration. Always remember that the final product of this reaction, which is Calvin cycle, is glucose or sugar. At this moment, bring out your answer sheet on the previous quiz and let's check if your answers are right. Are you ready? Let's start. Number 1. The answer is true. Number 2. What's the answer? It's false. Number 3. The answer is false. Number 4. The answer again is false. Number 5. The answer is true. Count your scores. How many of you got a perfect score? Congratulations! You did a great job. For those who scored low, you can still improve your rating by listening attentively on our discussion.
Mga tropa, dito sa ilog na lamang natin itapon ang mga basurang ito. Total maaano din naman. Oops, saan nyo yan itatapon mga bata? Itatapon namin sa ilog, tita. Nako, mali ang kaisipang iyan. Ito ay magdudulot ng pagkamatay ng mga isda. Gawin na lamang natin ang reduce, reuse at recycle o 3Rs. Ang basura ay ginagawang kapaki-pakinabang at ito ay mabisang paraan para mabawasan ang basura sa kapaligiran. Kaya tara na, mag 3Rs na. Salamat tita! Ngayon alam na namin ang gagawin sa mga basura para makatulong pa sa kalikasan.
Isang paalala mula sa kagawaran ng edukasyon at ng himpilang ito.
Now, are you ready to learn something new? Let's begin! Do you do household chores at home? What chores are your favorite? Is it washing the dishes, feeding your pets, or gardening? Do you also do exercise like biking, dancing, swimming, and running? Did you know that in order to carry out these activities, these cells need to be powered up first by an energy containing called adenosine triphosphate or commonly known as ATP. This high energy molecule is used in many biochemical processes like biosynthesis of macromolecules, active transport, nerve transmission, growth and repair, and movement. But where did this molecule came from and how are these created? Adenosine triphosphate is a biomolecule which is made up of one molecule of adenine and one molecule of ribose sugar, which is represented by the initial A, and three molecules of phosphate lie together by a phosphate bond, which is represented by initial TP and short ATP. When water is added, the bond from the third phosphate molecule breaks apart, which releases energy that can last up to 15 seconds. Since there were only two remaining phosphate, the ATP molecules becomes ADP or adenosine diphosphate. Did you know that each ADP molecules can be recycled back up to 1,500 times a day? You heard it right. Though energy cannot be recycled, the materials that made this energy can be used again. The ADP molecule can be recycled back and use new molecule of phosphate when they are energized to reconstruct ATP molecule. Do you still remember where most process of ATP production takes place? Correct, it's in mitochondria. You have learned in your previous lessons that mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, where they transform the food that human ingests into usable energy to power up the entire cell. The major regions of this organelle are outer membrane, intermembrane space, inner membrane, cristae, and matrix. These parts work together to perform the process known as cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is a process in which biomolecules like glucose are converted into an energy form that the cell can use, which is the ATP. Cellular respiration is the opposite of photosynthesis. If photosynthesis is an anabolic process because it uses energy to build up glucose molecules, cellular respiration is catabolic process. It consumes molecules of glucose to release energy. Unlike photosynthesis, which is only done by autotrophic organisms like plants and some bacteria, cellular respiration involves all living organisms, be it eukaryotic or prokaryotic, unicellular or multicellular, simple or complex, heterotroph or autotroph. There are different ways on how living organisms do this process because some requirements for survival is different from one organism to another. In fact, organisms can be classified into 4 major classifications based on the types of cellular respiration they perform. The first one is obligate aerobes, which are the organisms that cannot survive without oxygen, like animals, including us humans. Second one is obligate anaerobe, which are organisms that cannot survive if oxygen is present. Certain species of bacteria are obligate anaerobe, such as Clostridium tetani, which causes tetanus. The third one is aerotolerant organisms, or organisms that can live in the presence of oxygen, but does not use it to grow. Example, the bacterium Streptococcus, which causes strep throat. The fourth one is facultative aerobes, or the organisms that can use oxygen to grow but can also perform an aerobic respiration. For example, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which is the yeast used in winemaking. From the classifications, we conclude that cellular respiration can take place with or without oxygen. The cellular respiration that requires oxygen is called aerobic respiration, while the cellular respiration that do not require oxygen is called anaerobic respiration. Let's discuss the aerobic respiration first. The first stage of cellular respiration is glycolysis, which means a splitting of glucose. In this stage, glucose molecules are broken down to create ATP, which happens in the cell's cytoplasm, the gel-like structure that fills the cell. Although the process consumes 2 ATP molecules, it produces 4 more, as well as 2 other substances, pyruvate and NADPH. Glycolysis can take place without the presence of oxygen. Again, the destination of pyruvate molecule produced in glycolysis depends on the presence of oxygen. If there is no oxygen, then the process will proceed into fermentation. If oxygen is present, it will proceed on the second stage of aerobic respiration, which is the transition reaction. The second stage of aerobic respiration connects the glycolysis and wherein the pyruvate from the glycolysis used to create acetyl coenzyme and carbon dioxide. The third one is known as citric acid cycle, or commonly known as Krebs cycle. In this stage, acetyl coenzyme A is used to create more NADH, as well as FADH2, carbon dioxide, and an additional ATP molecule. The final stage is electron transport chain, wherein NADH, FADH2, and oxygen are used to create massive amount of ATP. This stage also creates water molecule. Again, can you repeat the pathway of aerobic respiration? Fantastic! First, glycolysis. Second, transition reaction. Third, Krebs cycle. And fourth is the electron transport chain. I want you to take note of the overall chemical equation of aerobic respiration, which is 1 molecule of glucose plus 6 molecules of oxygen yields to 6 molecules of carbon dioxide and 6 molecules of water, plus energy in the form of ATP. Now, you know aerobic respiration provides energy to fuel all cellular processes since the reaction produces large amount of ATP or adenosine triphosphate, right? But where do these ATP molecules use for? Good. The ATP molecules are used to run life-sustaining functions like growth, repair, and maintenance. Physical activities like running, walking, swimming, and other aerobic activities you do every day is also powered by this kind of respiration. However, not all organisms can perform aerobic respiration, so they perform anaerobic respiration. Organisms that do not need oxygen, unlike us humans, perform different pathways after the process of glycolysis. The series of reactions in anaerobic respiration is typically shorter, and it uses a final electron acceptor such as sulfate, nitrate, sulfur, fumarate instead of oxygen. Unlike most processes of aerobic respiration, which takes place in the cell's mitochondria, anaerobic respiration occurs in the cell's cytoplasm. I repeat, anaerobic respiration occurs in the cytoplasm. This is because muscles that exclusively carry out anaerobic respiration are lower forms of organism like prokaryotes, and they do not have specialized organelles. Remember, the pathway of anaerobic respiration is first, glycolysis, and second, fermentation. There are two main types of anaerobic respiration: alcoholic and lactic acid fermentation. Alcoholic fermentation is the process of converting glucose into molecule ethanol. This process is generally done by microscopic organisms like bacteria and certain fungi like yeast. The glucose are broken down by glycolysis, releasing 2 ATP molecules and creating 2 pyruvic acid molecules. The pyruvic acid molecules then they have another carbon atom removed from each, resulting in 2 ethanol molecules and 2 carbon dioxide molecules. No more ATP is produced after the initial 2 from the glycolysis reaction. The carbon dioxide produced as byproduct when yeast perform alcoholic fermentation on the sugar and the bread mix is the gas that causes dough to rise. The sugars produced in bugnay, grapes, apple, rice, and other grains and fruits is what allows yeast to produce the bubbles and alcohols in beer, wine, and other liquors. Did you know that anaerobic respiration is now being used to create large volume of ethanol to use as gasoline additive for automobiles? Corn or soybeans are generally used as the source of starch that is then broken down by enzymes into thousands of glucose molecules. These glucose molecules are then introduced to a series of bacteria that perform the alcoholic fermentation to produce the ethanol. The idea is to change overall automobiles to be able to run on pure synthetic fuel so that we can lessen our dependence on petroleum-based products. The second type of anaerobic respiration or fermentation is the lactic acid. Lactic acid fermentation occurs in animals after glycolysis if there is no enough oxygen to perform aerobic respiration. It is also performed by some bacteria like Lactobacillus. Again, the only ATP that is produced in lactic acid fermentation occurs during glycolysis reactions. After glycolysis, the pyruvic acid is changed into another 3-carbon molecule or lactic acid, and no carbon dioxide is produced unlike alcoholic fermentation. In humans, strenuous exercises causes muscle cells to change from aerobic to anaerobic as the oxygen supply becomes inadequate to meet demand. Such conditions cause pyruvate to be converted to lactate rather than acetyl-CoA. The resulting lactate begins to accumulate in the cytosol of the cells where it is produced. Some lactate diffuses out of the cells into the blood, where it contributes to a slight decrease in blood pH. This lower pH triggers fast breathing, which helps supply more oxygen to the cells. This is the very reason why you feel sore a day after an exercise, especially if you did not do such activity for a long period of time. The muscle pain, stiffness, and cramping that you feel is simply the result of the accumulation of the lactic acid. But if you practice hard exercise regularly, the efficiency with which oxygen is delivered to the body increases. Thus, athletes can function longer than non-athletes under aerobic conditions without lactate production. Lactate accumulation can also occur in heart muscle if it experiences decreased oxygen supply because of the blockage of artery. When this happens, the heart muscle experiences cramps and it stops beating, which is also called cardiac arrest, one of the major killer disease in the world. Now that you have learned the processes of aerobic and anaerobic respiration, let us try to compare aerobic and anaerobic respiration on the following basis. First, definition. Aerobic respiration is a set of metabolic reactions that takes place in the presence of oxygen occurring in a cell to convert chemical energy into ATP. On the other hand, anaerobic respiration is a process of cellular respiration where the high-energy electron acceptor is not oxygen. Second, the presence of oxygen. Aerobic respiration takes place in the presence of oxygen, while anaerobic respiration takes place in condition where there is absence of oxygen or a low oxygen environment. Third, the location. Aerobic respiration after glycolysis occurs in the mitochondria of eukaryotic and cytoplasm of prokaryotic, while anaerobic respiration occurs only in the cytoplasm of the cell of the eukaryotic or prokaryotic cell. Fourth one, the end products. The products of aerobic respirations are carbon dioxide, water, and energy, while the products of anaerobic respiration can be alcohol, lactic acid, gases, and energy. Fifth one, the reactants. Aerobic respiration requires glucose and oxygen, while anaerobic respiration requires glucose and some electron acceptor like sulfur and nitrogen are required. Sixth, the oxidation reaction, or simple, the reaction of glucose or carbon dioxide in aerobic respiration is complete, while in anaerobic respiration, it's incomplete. Lastly, the organisms involved. Aerobic respiration occurs in most of the higher organisms like plants, animals, and other macroorganisms, while anaerobic respiration occurs in the lower form of organisms like bacteria and yeast, although anaerobic respiration also takes place in the muscle cells in the animals like humans during extreme movements. Do not also forget the pathways of aerobic respiration, which is glycolysis, transition reaction, Krebs cycle, and electron transport chain, while the pathway of anaerobic respiration is glycolysis and fermentation, either alcoholic or lactic acid formation. Now, please prepare yourselves because you will have a quiz after this short break.
Hello po, Itay.
Hello anak, nakita ko na pala yung napadala mo sa litrato sa messenger. Wow anak, ang galing-galing mo naman. Manang-mana ka talaga sa tatay.
Siyempre naman, Itay. Perfect ko nga po yung mate. Salamat sa iyo at sa DepEd Commons. Kahit nasa ibang bansa ka, natuturuan mo pa rin ako. Maraming salamat, Itay.
Walang anuman anak.
Ang DepEd Commons ay isang online platform para sa distance learning na inilunsad ng Kagawaran ng Edukasyon para sa tuloy-tuloy na edukasyon. Buksan lang sa inyong internet browser ang commons.deped.gov.ph para sa mga detalye.
Your radio teacher is back. Quiz consists of only 5 items and all of them are multiple choice, so choose the letter of the correct answer wisely. Let's start. Number 1. Which of the following organelles is the site where most of the ATP production happens? A. Nucleus, B. Endoplasmic reticulum, C. Mitochondria, or D. Chloroplast? Number 2. The fate of the pyruvic molecules depends on the presence of what element? A. Oxygen, B. Carbon dioxide, C. Methane, or D. ATP? Number 3. Which of the following is a balance equation of aerobic respiration? A. 1 molecule of glucose plus 3 molecules of oxygen gas yields to 1 molecule of carbon dioxide plus 1 molecule of water. B. 1 molecule of glucose plus 6 molecules of oxygen gas yield to 6 molecules of carbon dioxide plus 6 molecules of water. C. 1 molecule of glucose plus 6 molecules of oxygen yields to 6 molecules of carbon dioxide and 3 molecules of water. Number 4. What are the products of anaerobic respiration of yeast cells? A. Glucose and oxygen, B. Carbon dioxide and water, C. Ethanol and water, or D. Ethanol and carbon dioxide? Number 5. A cell with relatively few energy needs will probably have a relatively small number of blank. A. Ribosome, B. Lysosome, C. Mitochondria, or D. Chromosomes? Were you able to answer everything? Good job! We are done with the 7th episode of General Biology. If something is not clear or some questions about our lesson bothers you, you can ask your subject teacher about it, or check out the YouTube videos about cellular respiration. Also, don't forget to pass your learning activity sheets to your teachers. Kindly answer the activities not included in this episode. You just listened to another fruitful lesson in General Biology. On behalf of our scriptwriter, Ma'am Giselle Andres, and the SDO Isabela RBI production team, I am your radio teacher, Sir Alexander Espicio, reminding all you to stay home, stay safe, and God bless everyone.
Patuloy ang edukasyon para sa ating henerasyon.
Sa daan ng pagkatuto ay walang may iwan.
Kaya halina sa Radyo Eskwela!